Welcome back to 5-minute modules where I show you that you can do these exercises in 5 minutes or less. Today we're going to look at 4.3a, which talks about methods of sampling from your target population into your survey sample. So, like we do each time, let's look at the instructions. In 4.3a, it's basically asking us to give a set of steps or procedures to make a random sample. Now, the key thing about randomness is that every single individual unit of the target population has an equal chance of getting into the sample pool. In the Maxwell manual on pages 44 and following, as you can see here, they basically give you two types of way of sampling. One is simple random sampling and the other is cluster sampling. I'm going to go over both of them here. So let's go back to the instructions. So what would a simple random sample look like? Well, let me give you a set of steps. The first thing you have to do is find a comprehensive directory including the target population. This could be a telephone book, it could be a yearbook if it's a school, it could be a property cadaster if you're looking at, let's say, people who are living in a county. It could be the eligible voter rolls, it could be a directory of official or bureaucrat, of elected officials or bureaucrats, or it could be the membership directory of a group or organization. So how am I going to make this random? Well, I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way. I'm going to roll a dice. I'm going to roll the dice, there's a number on the dice, I count down that number down the directory, select that name, roll the dice again, write down that name, roll the dice again, roll down the name, until I have enough, let's say, people to contact. And, if, for example, I go through the directory, I start at the beginning again, or if I don't get enough people, then I go and resample by repeating steps 2 through 5. This would generate a simple random sample. There's other ways to do this. You could go through the yearbook and choose, let's say, every name on the left-hand side of the page, which is basically saying I'm going to take every fifth person in, let's say, the senior class of a high school. Those are other ways to generate random samples. But if you want to, let's say, be a little more high-tech, you could go to a site like random.org. At random.org, they have random number generators, things that simulate coin flips, dice rolls, card shuffling. They'll give you a random number sequence. Any one of these could use to, let's say, generate a system or a procedure to do a random sample. So let's go back to the instructions though. So here we have, let's say, we basically answered 4.3a and we gave them a simple random sample. The other one is cluster sampling. Now how do we do cluster sampling? Well, let me just show you a graph kind of showing the logic of cluster sampling. What you can see here is how a cluster sample would work. What we do is basically a series of filters, and we get down to one unit. For example, this shows you the steps. First of all, you might decide to choose a state, one of 50 states, let's call it New York. And then we choose, let's say within the state, a primary area. This could be a county like Onondaga County. And then with that primary area, we might divide it up into, let's say, townships. So let's say we choose East Syracuse, Manoa. Within East Syracuse, Manoa, we can choose, let's say, city blocks. Let's say we choose a chunk block on, let's say, some street in East Syracuse, Manoa. Then we can choose a segment from that block, let's say houses facing one side of the block. And within that, we can choose one, let's say, housing unit. That's who we're going to choose. Now, this makes it independent because basically it's a series of filters. Each one is, let's say, a coin flip of whether you're going to choose one or the other. Effectively, this simulates a random process. Now, another way just looking at it is you can see here. We can start with the region, and maybe we want to use cluster sampling because we want to have particular things represented. For example, a particular demographic group, a particular, let's say, setting, urban or rural. And what we can do is start with the region, divide into 3 sections, divide those into sections, and then eventually we'll get a certain number of households within each unit. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, what cluster sample look like? Well, I'm not going to show you here today, but basically you go through those steps. Let's say you wanted a cluster sample, let's say within a community. You could say, well, I'm going to choose a town. Within that town there are several zip codes. Within those zip codes are several streets. Within those streets are, let's say, numbers on the street, and I'm going to choose every 4th or 5th one. That's another way to get a sample. This is particularly important if you're doing a public policy issue where people living in different areas are actually relevant. For example, if it's pollution around the lake, you want to make sure you have people close to the lake versus far away from the lake in the town. So this is how we would do 4.3a, and that's another 5-minute module.